Long before that night in September 2018, I used to think of Birchwood Avenue as the safest place on earth. It was the kind of quiet Washington suburb where the mailman waved at your cat, where every porch had a wind chime, and where the loudest sound at night was rain sliding off gutters. I had moved there 3 years earlier, after my divorce. Trying to start over as a freelance web designer, I wasn't rich, but my little bungalow was mine. White siding, creaky floors, a small front garden that smelled like lavender after rain. I didn't have many neighbors. To my left lived the Connollys, an older couple who watched Jeopardy every night. To my right, an empty rental that had been available soon for nearly a year. Maybe that's why I loved the solitude. I could go days without speaking to anyone except my clients and my cat, Milo, who seemed perfectly content with the arrangement. That Monday night started like most others. I was hunched over my laptop, coding a client's website while a Pacific storm rattled the windows. The Wi-Fi flickered like it always did during bad weather. "Come on, not again," I muttered, pushing my glasses up my nose. When the connection dropped for the third time, I gave up. I brewed a cup of chamomile tea, wrapped myself in a throw blanket, and opened the window an inch to breathe in the scent of wet earth. That's when I saw him. Across the street, beneath the flickering street lamp, a tall man stood in the rain. He wore a dark coat and didn't move, just faced my house as if he were waiting for something. The rational part of me whispered, "It's just someone walking home." But there was something deliberate about his stillness. Even Milo noticed, his ears pricked, tail twitching. The man stepped off the curb, slowly, like he knew I was watching. My pulse quickened. I turned away, pretending to check my phone, but the faint sound of his shoes tapping on wet pavement reached my ears. Then, silence. I told myself not to panic. "Probably just a drunk," I whispered. But the unease settled in my chest like a stone. When I finally worked up the courage to glance out again, he was gone. I sighed with relief, but that relief shattered seconds later. 3 faint taps on the glass behind me. My reflection stared back from the window pane, eyes wide. Outside, glistening in the porch light, were muddy footprints leading right up to the door. My breath caught. I slammed the latch shut, locked every window, and whispered, "You're fine, Lena. You're just tired." Then came the sound I'll never forget. Footsteps. On my back deck, slow and heavy. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering to the operator, "Please, there's someone outside my house." The voice on the other end was calm, steady. "Stay somewhere safe, ma'am. Officers are on their way. Don't hang up." I hid in the upstairs bathroom, crouched beside the tub, heart pounding. The house was silent except for the faint metallic clink of the back door handle jiggling. I bit my lip so hard I tasted blood. When the flashing blue lights finally appeared, I almost cried. 2 officers swept the property, but the man was gone. They found fresh boot prints beneath every window and a small crowbar resting on my porch rail. One of the officers muttered, "He was waiting for the right moment." That night, I didn't sleep. Milo pressed against my side while the rain turned to mist outside. Every creak made me flinch. I didn't know it yet, but that night was only the beginning. The police were kind, but there wasn't much they could do. "Probably an attempted burglary," one officer said, jotting notes in his pad. "Keep your doors locked, get motion lights, maybe a camera system." "Do you think he'll come back?" I asked. He hesitated. "They usually don't, but it's good to be cautious." For days after, I jumped at every noise. I ordered a Ring camera, new deadbolts, even a baseball bat that I kept by the bed. Still, unease lingered. Every night I found myself staring at the window, waiting for movement under the street lamp. Friends told me to stay somewhere else for a while, but leaving felt like surrender. Instead, I tried to take control. I joined a neighborhood watch group online, asked the Connollys to keep an eye out. Mr. Connolly nodded, his wrinkled face serious. "If I see anyone strange, you'll be the first to know." Days passed, then weeks. Nothing happened. The rain kept coming, the trees kept shedding leaves, and I started to convince myself that maybe it was truly over. I even began working at a cafe downtown some evenings, just to be around people. But one night, about a month later, I came home to find something small, but chilling. My garden gate was open. I always latched it, always. I closed it, locking the hook in place, but unease crawled up my spine again. Inside, everything looked untouched, until I walked into the kitchen. On the counter sat a wet leaf, shaped like a footprint. It must have blown in through the window, I told myself. Yet I hadn't opened a window all day. I checked the Ring footage. Nothing. No motion alerts, no faces, just rain falling in slow, steady sheets. Still, something felt wrong, like the house had been entered. That night, I dreamed of the man again, standing under the lamp, unmoving, watching. When I woke, the lamp outside was off for the first time since I'd lived there. The darkness felt heavier than silence. By November, I'd grown jumpy but functional again. I worked, met clients, even smiled sometimes. Then one evening, while scrolling through emails, I saw a message from an unknown address. Subject: "You should really close your curtains." I froze. The email had no name, no signature, just those 7 words. I checked the timestamp, 10:32 p.m. That was minutes earlier. My curtains were open. I rushed to the window, yanked them shut, and turned off every light in the house. My mind raced. Maybe it was spam, a prank. But deep down, I knew better. The next day, I filed another police report. The officer on duty, a young woman named Ramirez, took it seriously. "Do you have any idea who might be doing this?" "No," I said. "I don't have enemies. I barely have friends." She promised to increase patrols in the area, but patrols don't stop shadows. That week, more emails came. "You still make chamomile tea at night. You looked tired yesterday." "Rough night?" "Tell your cat I said hi." I changed passwords, shut down accounts, bought blackout curtains. Yet somehow, the messages kept finding me. Different addresses, same tone. Whoever it was, they knew my routines, my habits, even my fears. I stopped sleeping. I'd sit in bed with Milo in my lap, phone in hand, waiting for morning. I felt my sanity fray at the edges, but what scared me most wasn't the intruder. It was how invisible he could be in my digital life. In December, the emails stopped. For almost 2 weeks, nothing. Silence. I started to breathe again, even put up a small Christmas tree. I told myself he'd grown bored, moved on. Then, on December 21st, the doorbell rang at 10:45 p.m. I froze. No one visited me that late. Through the peephole, I saw nothing, just darkness. The bell rang again, followed by 3 slow knocks, exactly like that first night. My phone slipped from my hand. I backed away, whispering, "Go away." Then a voice, low, male, calm. "Lena, open the door. I just want to talk." I recognized it immediately. It was the same voice from one of the voicemails I'd received weeks earlier. I hadn't realized it then, but hearing it in person made everything click. I dialed 911 again, whispering into the phone. The dispatcher kept me talking until the sirens came. By the time they arrived, the man was gone, but he'd left something behind on the porch railing. A brown, folded piece of paper. Inside a plastic sleeve to keep it dry. It read, "You shouldn't have called the cops." That night, the police stayed with me until dawn. Officer Ramirez insisted I stay with a friend. I packed a bag and drove to my brother's house in Tacoma the next morning. For the first time in months, I felt safe. Months passed. I sold the house, moved into an apartment downtown. Surrounded by neighbors and streetlights, I installed new locks, cameras, alarms, everything. The police never found the man. No fingerprints on the crowbar, no trace from the emails. Whoever he was, he vanished like fog. Life slowly returned to normal, but fear left its fingerprints on everything I did. I checked locks twice. Sometimes 3 times I avoided eye contact with strangers. I even stopped using my real name online. One spring evening, I was walking home from the grocery store when I saw it, a street lamp flickering in the distance, and beneath it, for just a second, a tall figure watching. My breath hitched. I blinked, and he was gone. Maybe it was just another man heading home, or maybe not. Either way, I realized something then. Safety isn't just about locks and alarms. It's about awareness, about trusting your instincts before it's too late. In a world where connection comes with exposure, protecting your privacy means protecting your peace. Never ignore your instincts. Never assume danger only happens to others. And never forget that fear isn't weakness. It's your body's way of keeping you alive. When you buy a new house, they tell you about the joy of new beginnings, the smell of paint, the echo in the empty rooms, the promise of making it yours. Nobody tells you how a house can still belong to its ghosts. It was early October 2021 when we moved into 12 Amberwood Close, a modest 2-story brick home in the suburbs of Leeds. I say we, but that first week it was just me. Sophie had taken the kids to Devon to visit her parents, giving me time to unpack, finish a few plumbing repairs, and get used to the place. At 41, I thought solitude would be a gift. It wasn't. The first few nights were calm. I'd come home from the engineering plant, fix a few things, eat dinner in front of the TV, and sip a little scotch while the rain drummed against the windows. The house was so quiet I could hear the clock tick through the hallway. I remember thinking, this is peace. By Friday night, I was halfway through a bottle of Glenlivet, flipping through old records I hadn't played in years. I was humming along to Hotel California when the doorbell rang. One soft chime, then another, then 5 sharp rings in a row. Startled, I looked up at the video feed on my phone. The smart doorbell showed nothing. No one on the porch, just the wind pushing at the trees. I chuckled nervously. Probably kids. Every neighborhood had them. The kind who got a kick out of playing ding-dong ditch on a stormy night. I shut off the light, locked the door, and went upstairs. 10 minutes later came the pounding. Not light or teasing this time, but hard, rhythmic, like someone was trying to break the damn door down. "All right, that's enough," I yelled, heading toward the entryway. But before I got there, the power flickered, and I saw movement outside the living room window. 3 figures, flashlights cutting through the rain. For a second, I thought maybe it was the police. Then the front lock snapped. Metal against metal. Before I could even react, 4 men in dark clothing and masks burst through the door, shouting in accents I couldn't place. One grabbed my arm, shoving me into a chair. Another pulled duct tape from his pocket, wrapping it tight around my wrists. "Where's the vault?" the tall one demanded, his voice harsh. "What? I don't lie," another snapped, rifling through drawers. "Basement door. Where is it?" "I just moved in," I stammered. "There's no vault, no basement. I swear." They tore the house apart like wild dogs, pulling open vents, kicking through boxes, ripping pictures from the wall. The leader kept pacing, muttering in a language I didn't know. I could barely breathe. Then, one of them shouted, "Here, look at this." He held up an old dust-covered frame he'd found behind the boiler. It was a property deed. Not in my name, but in someone else's. Mr. and Mrs. Carlton. The men froze. For a heartbeat, no one said anything. Then the leader cursed loudly. "Wrong house," he hissed. They exchanged looks, their eyes glinting through the masks. And just like that, as quickly as they'd come, they bolted out the back door, vanishing into the storm. I sat there, shaking so hard the chair creaked beneath me I could still smell their sweat in the air. Minutes later, I saw flashing blue lights. A neighbor had heard the noise and called it in. The police found me still tied up, tape marks on my wrists, furniture overturned, drawers dumped across the floor. One officer said quietly, "You're lucky, mate. Looks like they thought you were someone else." But that was the thing. They hadn't thought I was someone else. They thought the house was. The police stayed until 3 a.m., dusting for prints, taking statements. The detective, a square-jawed guy named Willis, showed me the old property deed they'd found. "The Carltons owned this place for 20 years, he said. "Any idea who they are?" "Never met them," I said. "We bought the house through an agent. I assumed they moved abroad." Willis exchanged a look with another officer. "You assumed right. We've had their names come up in a financial investigation, offshore accounts, missing funds. Not your problem anymore, but looks like your house used to be part of their operation." I stared at the wreckage. Broken glass, torn wallpaper, muddy boot prints. My home, brand new a week ago, already felt poisoned. For days, I couldn't relax. Every creak made my heart race. Every passing car's headlights sent shadows crawling across the ceiling. I replaced the locks, bought cameras, even installed a motion sensor that pinged my phone if anyone got too close. Still, I didn't sleep. When Sophie and the kids came home, I tried to downplay it. "Wrong house, wrong night," I said, forcing a smile. But she could see through me. Every time the doorbell rang, I flinched. Every time the kids ran up the stairs too fast, I yelled at them to slow down. I'd turned paranoid, and we all felt it. One evening, Sophie found me sitting in the dark living room, staring at the front door. "Daniel," she said softly, "we're safe now. You can't keep living like this." But she didn't hear what I heard. That faint creak outside, like someone testing a step. She didn't see the flicker of light that sometimes crossed the porch camera at night. The police never caught the intruders. The Carltons, the couple who owned the house before us, had disappeared. Their assets frozen, their names whispered in headlines about tax fraud and stolen money. And me? I was just the guy who happened to buy their hiding place. Weeks passed. The repairs were finished, and the neighbors tried to move on. Everyone wanted to forget. But some nights, the silence in that house felt heavier than noise. It was a Thursday when the doorbell rang again. 11:45 p.m. I froze, glass halfway to my lips. The sound was soft. Once, then twice. I turned to the video feed. Nothing. Just darkness. My stomach knotted. I stood up slowly, heart pounding, and whispered to myself, "It's the wind. Just the wind." Then it rang again. I didn't move for a full minute. The clock ticked. Rain fell. And then it stopped. No more ringing. Just stillness. The next morning, I checked the camera footage, and there it was. A faint, blurry silhouette standing at the edge of the driveway at 11:46, perfectly still, not moving, not approaching, just watching. When I showed Sophie, she went pale. "Maybe it's one of them," she whispered. I called Detective Willis again. He came by that afternoon, studied the footage, and sighed. Too grainy to tell could be a trick of the light, or a neighbor walking a dog. But I'll put in for an extra patrol. That night, I left the lights on. By November, I'd convinced myself to sell the house. Sophie agreed. She wanted to leave, to start fresh somewhere no one knew our names. Then the letter came. No return address. Just a folded envelope slipped through the mail slot. Inside, a single page. We never found it. Check behind the cellar wall. My hands shook as I read it. Behind the cellar wall? We didn't have a cellar. But something in me couldn't let it go. I grabbed a flashlight, went down to the utility room, and started knocking on the plaster. Near the far corner, the sound changed. Hollow. I pulled at the edge of the drywall until a small panel came loose. Behind it was a narrow, brick-lined space barely 2 feet wide. Inside, wrapped in plastic, was a metal box. My breath caught. I didn't open it. I couldn't. Instead, I called Willis. When he arrived with 2 other officers, they pried it open. Inside were wads of British pounds, several passports, and a small USB drive. Willis whistled softly. "Looks like your intruders were right after all." The money was seized as evidence. The police said I'd done the right thing, but that didn't help me sleep any better. Because now, someone out there knew we'd found what they couldn't. We moved out by Christmas. I never went back to Amberwood Close, but sometimes, in the quiet of night, when I'm lying beside Sophie, I'll hear it in my mind. The chime of that doorbell, echoing like a warning. I learned later that the intruders had been part of a crime ring tied to the Carltons. They were arrested in another county months after we moved. None of them mentioned the break-in. But what haunts me most isn't their faces. It's the feeling that someone else might come one day. Someone who still believes the vault holds more. Every time the wind rattles the windows, every time a delivery driver knocks twice, I freeze. I see those silhouettes again. Flashlights cutting through the rain. Peace is fragile. Safety is temporary. I learned that too late. Even in the safest neighborhoods, danger doesn't always knock for you. Sometimes it knocks for the ones who came before. Be cautious about the past you inherit, for every place holds a history you can't always see. You can always tell when November is ending in Portland. The rain doesn't just fall. It breathes. It hums. It fills the air with a low kind of rhythm that makes the world feel smaller. The city turns gray and quiet, and people huddle indoors, pretending the weather isn't slowly pulling them apart. That's what I loved about it. The quiet. The way it gave me permission to disappear for a while. It was the last weekend of November 2019, and I was alone in the little craftsman house I rented with my roommate, Clara. She'd gone to Seattle to visit her parents, which meant I finally had the place to myself. No small talk, no music, no footsteps from the room across the hall. Just me, a blanket, and the rain. I remember lighting a candle, cedar wood and amber, and curling up on the couch with a glass of red wine. I put on some old true crime documentary, the kind I'd seen a dozen times before, and let the voices blur into the sound of thunder outside. My phone buzzed a few times from work emails, but I ignored them. I didn't want anyone or anything from the real world creeping into this small bubble of calm. The house creaked the way old houses do, as if exhaling after years of holding its breath. I didn't mind. I'd grown used to its noises, the pipes, the wind, the faint scratch of branches against the window. But that night, something about it felt different. The air was heavier, thicker. Every sound seemed sharper. I blamed it on the storm. It was 11:58 p.m. when the first text came. My phone was on the couch. I just stood up to check the front door because it had rattled in the wind. When I reached for the lock, my phone buzzed, the screen glowing against the dim light. The message was from an unknown number. It said, "Don't lock me out." At first, I laughed, a nervous, ridiculous kind of laugh. It had to be Clara. I thought maybe she was pranking me, pretending to be one of those horror movie texters. But the timing made me stop smiling. Another message came. "Please, it's cold out here." I froze. My hand still rested on the lock. I hadn't turned it yet. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the draft sneaking under the door. I locked it quickly, sliding the bolt with a sharp click, and stepped back. The storm outside howled. For a moment, I swore I heard movement. Faint, like shoes brushing against the porch. "Maya, you're just scaring yourself," I muttered. Talking out loud made it feel less real. But then came the next message. "You shouldn't have done that." The lights flickered. Somewhere deep in the house, something shifted. A low scraping sound, like a chair being dragged across the kitchen floor. And that was when my calm night turned into something else entirely. I stood in the hallway, every nerve awake. I told myself the sound was nothing. Maybe wind pushing through the vents. Maybe a vibration from thunder shaking the floors. But the sound came again. Slow, deliberate. The kitchen was dark except for the weak glow from the street lamp filtering through the curtains. I could just make out the shape of the dining table. "Hello?" My voice cracked as I called out. No answer. I gripped my phone like a weapon, my thumb hovering over the call button. I took one cautious step forward, then another. My sock slid a little on the hardwood floor. The scraping stopped. I exhaled slowly. "Okay, it's fine," I whispered. "You're losing it. It's just..." The phone buzzed again. "Come sit with me." The words made my stomach turn. I looked up, and that's when I saw her. Someone, a woman, was sitting at the table. Her hair was dripping wet, her clothes clinging to her skin. She didn't move, didn't even look at me. "Clara?" I whispered, even though I knew it wasn't her. The woman's head tilted slightly, and I swear I heard a faint sound, like a breath, but distorted. I blinked. My heart was hammering. When I opened my eyes again, the chair across from her was pulled out just an inch farther than before. I backed away slowly, step by step, until I hit the edge of the couch. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my phone. When I picked it up again, the screen was black, dead battery. That was the moment I ran. The front door was wide open. The lock I had turned minutes ago was bent, twisted, as if someone had forced it. Rain blew inside, cold against my face. I ran barefoot into the storm, clutching my phone, and called 911. My voice trembled so much the dispatcher had to ask me to repeat the address twice. The police arrived in less than 10 minutes. The blue and red lights painted everything unreal, like I was watching someone else's nightmare. Inside, the house was silent. The officers searched every room. No one was there. The back door was locked. The windows were intact. But in the kitchen, one chair was slightly pulled out. And on the table, right where the woman had been sitting, was my phone. Only, I had it in my hand. When the officer picked it up, the screen lit with a message draft, one line, half-typed, "Don't lock me out again." I don't remember much after that. I remember sitting on the porch wrapped in a blanket, shaking so hard I could barely hold the cup of tea a neighbor brought me. The officers said maybe it was a hacker prank, that sometimes scammers could remotely control phones, send fake messages. But that didn't explain the open door, or the woman. I moved out 2 weeks later. Clara helped me pack. She kept saying how sorry she was for leaving me alone that weekend. When I turned in the keys, the landlord, an older man with kind eyes, hesitated before signing the final papers. "You know," he said, "the girl who lived there before you, she moved out in a hurry too. Kept saying someone was trying to get in at night. I thought she was just nervous, living alone." "What happened to her?" I asked. He shrugged. "No idea. She stopped answering calls. I should have warned you maybe." I didn't answer. My throat felt tight. That night, in my new apartment across the city, I plugged in my phone before bed. For a long time I stared at the screen. At midnight it lit up once, a faint flash, no sound, no message, Just a notification that vanished before I could read it. It's been years now. 2025. I still live in Portland, though never in a house again. Apartments feel safer. You can hear your neighbors through the walls. You're never fully alone. But every November, when the storms roll in and the rain hums against the windows, I remember that house. The creak of the floorboards, the hum of the candle, the voice I never heard but somehow felt. Sometimes I think about that message. Don't lock me out. I wonder if it was a warning, not a threat. Maybe someone, or something, really was out there that night, not trying to hurt me, but trying to come home. Or maybe the house just wanted to be remembered. Either way, I always lock my doors now. Always check them twice. And every year, on the last weekend of November, my phone lights up at exactly 11:58 p.m. One silent, flickering glow in the dark. No message, no number, just a reminder. I never thought moving to Asheville would mark the beginning of the worst year of my life. When I signed that lease in early 2022, I imagined peace, quiet evenings after my diner shifts, my own little sanctuary tucked among the pine trees. I was 25, single, and proud that I'd finally managed to afford a place without roommates. The one-bedroom apartment sat at the end of a gravel drive that wound off a country road. The landlord called it cozy. That was a nice way of saying small and a little creepy. I'd come from Raleigh, burned out and desperate for change. My new job at the 24-hour diner seemed like a decent start. The customers were mostly truckers and locals. They tipped okay, and I didn't mind the smell of coffee clinging to my hair. After years of noise and roommates who never cleaned their dishes, that apartment felt like freedom. The first few weeks went fine. The flickering porch light annoyed me, but I never got around to changing it. On March 4th, I worked a double shift that left me dead on my feet. Rain was starting to fall when I pulled into the drive close to midnight. I remember thinking how peaceful the woods sounded, how good it felt to be alone. I changed into sweats, tossed my phone on the couch, and let the TV play infomercials until I drifted off. At 3:17 a.m., the doorbell rang. It startled me so badly I almost fell off the couch. It rang again, longer this time. I grabbed the blanket around my shoulders and stumbled toward the door, my heart thudding. Who rings a doorbell at that hour? Through the peephole, I saw a man on the porch. He wore a dark jacket and held a clipboard, the brim of his cap shadowing his face. He smiled when he saw movement behind the peephole. "Evening, miss," he said, voice calm and low. "Sorry to wake you. Late night drop-off mix-up. Got a package for you. Just need a signature." Something about his tone didn't fit the apology. I hesitated. "What company are you from?" He tilted his head slightly, smile stretching. For a heartbeat, he said nothing. Then softly, "I can hear your TV inside, Emma." The sound of my name from a stranger's mouth froze me. My name wasn't on the mailbox. The lease hadn't even been processed fully. Nobody in town knew me yet. "I'm calling the police," I said, forcing my voice steady. Silence. When I looked again, the porch was empty. I killed the lights, hands shaking, and whispered into my phone to 911. The dispatcher kept me calm while I described him. As I talked, faint crunches of gravel circled the building, slow, deliberate. Then came scratching at the kitchen window, like a coin dragged across glass. I locked myself in the bathroom, clutching the phone until blue and red lights finally washed through the blinds. Officers searched the property but found no one. Muddy footprints led up to the door, and a fake delivery label, printed with my full name, was taped beside the handle. They took a report. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The cops said it was probably a prank. Maybe someone got my name from a delivery database. Still, Officer Jensen promised to have the landlord install a camera. By Monday, it was mounted above my door, small and blinking red. I told myself that was enough. For a week, I tried to act normal, work, eat, collapse into bed, but every creak of the building made me tense. The woods that once looked peaceful now felt like a wall hiding eyes. I kept the blinds closed, left the TV on for background noise, and jumped every time gravel popped beneath a tire. Exactly 7 nights later, Friday, 3:17 a.m., the alert from the new camera buzzed my phone. Half asleep, I opened the feed. He was there. Same jacket, same cap, no clipboard this time. He just stood on my porch, looking straight into the lens, smiling faintly. The timestamp ticked for nearly 2 minutes before he turned and walked back into the trees. When officers arrived again, he was gone. They dusted for prints and found nothing. Could be someone local messing around, one said. We'll keep an eye out. Messing around, I packed a go bag that night, but exhaustion and denial made me stay. I didn't want to run again so soon after starting over. The following evenings blurred together. Sometimes I'd think I heard a bell, faint and quick. Sometimes the porch light flickered brighter than usual, like someone had brushed against the sensor. My coworkers noticed the circles under my eyes. "You sure you're okay, Em?" my manager asked. I lied and said yes. One morning before work, I found small pebbles lined neatly along the window ledge. Each speckled with mud, I swept them away without thinking, though the pattern looked too deliberate to be random. Mid-March brought colder nights and endless rain. I started crashing on the couch instead of the bedroom. It felt closer to the front door, safer somehow. On the 18th, after another long shift, I came home to find an envelope stuck under the doormat. No address, no stamp. Inside was a blank piece of paper, except for a single printed line. "Package rescheduled, awaiting your signature." I called the police again. Officer Jensen came out, patient as ever, but what could he do? "No fingerprints, no witnesses," he said. "Might be time to think about staying with family for a bit." That night, I couldn't bring myself to turn off the lights. I watched the camera feed on my phone until my eyes ached. Around 3 a.m., the motion sensor triggered again. The porch was empty, but the camera glitched, flickering to static for 5 seconds. When the image returned, a shadow shifted near the tree line, tall and thin. Then it was gone. I barely worked the next day. My hands trembled pouring coffee. My boss told me to take the weekend off. I spent those 2 nights at a coworker's place across town, pretending to sleep on her couch while staring at my phone, waiting for another alert. None came. When I returned home Sunday, the front door lock felt different. Looser, as if someone had tried a key that didn't fit. I cried for the first time since moving to Asheville. By late March, paranoia had settled in like mold. I kept the phone charged beside me, the police on speed dial, a kitchen knife under my pillow. Every sound outside became a question. Then came the night the doorbell rang again, 3:17 a.m. sharp. I froze, staring at the ceiling. The bell chimed once, then again, longer, identical to the first night I whispered to myself, "Don't move, don't look." The bell stopped, replaced by knocking, 3 slow, polite taps. I crept to the hallway and peeked through the peephole. No one. My breath fogged the glass. I backed away, then heard footsteps retreating down the porch steps. When morning came, I opened the door. A cardboard box sat on the mat. No label, just my name written in black marker. I should have left it, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a single item, an old-fashioned brass doorbell button smeared with mud. That was it. I packed everything I owned into my car before sunrise. I drove straight to my parents' house in Greensboro without calling ahead. My mom cried when she saw me. Dad replaced my phone number that night, said we'd talk to state police in the morning. For weeks, nothing happened. The fear started to fade, replaced by exhaustion. Until one night in April, at my parents' home, I woke to my phone vibrating on the nightstand. The screen flickered once, then glowed with a notification. "Delivery delayed, awaiting your signature." No app name, no sender, Just that I've changed phones 3 times since then, but sometimes, rarely, the screen still flickers at 3:17 a.m. Maybe it's a glitch burned into my paranoia. Maybe not. I never went back to Asheville. The police never found the man. The landlord said the apartment stayed empty for months after I left, then finally rented to a college kid. I thought about warning him, but what would I say? There's someone out there who rings the bell at 3:17 a.m. I've tried rebuilding a normal life. I work days now at a cafe in Greensboro, close enough that my parents drop by sometimes. The scent of coffee still clings to me, but at least it means daylight. Some nights I catch myself checking the locks 3 times, or listening for gravel crunching under invisible footsteps. My friends joke that I'm jumpy. They don't know how quiet the woods can get when someone's waiting outside your door. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that danger doesn't always burst through with noise. Sometimes it knocks softly and smiles politely, holding a clipboard. When I remember that face, the half-shadowed grin, I wonder if he ever really wanted to hurt me, or if it was the chase, the control. Either way, he took something I can't get back. The simple belief that home means safety. I'm writing this now because part of me needs it recorded, needs the memory pinned down like evidence. Maybe someone else will read it and listen to that small voice that says, something's not right. Maybe they'll lock the door before curiosity wins. It's 3:16 a.m. as I finish typing. I'm going to turn off my phone before it decides to remind me what time it is. I never thought I'd leave Chicago for the middle of nowhere, but there I was, driving down a winding gravel road that disappeared into dense pines, the tires crunching over loose stones. My little gray-striped cat, Juniper, curled in her carrier at my feet. I was 29, broken-hearted, and desperate for quiet. A summer in my late grandparents' old white farmhouse seemed like the perfect remedy. I needed space, peace, and maybe a little distance from my own thoughts. The farmhouse wasn't fancy. White paint peeling in places, windows streaked from years of autumn rains. But it was mine for the next 3 months. The orchard behind it, with trees heavy with apples, smelled faintly of earth and decay. The air was crisp and a little sharp. A welcome change from the concrete and exhaust of the city. I spent the drive imagining mornings with coffee in the sunroom, evenings painting under soft lamplight, Juniper purring nearby. For the first few weeks, life was idyllic. I painted from sunrise to sunset, sending prints to my online customers, cooking simple meals, and reading on the porch while the cicadas hummed in the distance. The only sounds besides the wind and the cat's meows were the occasional crunch of a tractor tire far off in the valley, or a neighbor's dog barking somewhere behind the woods. The solitude was intoxicating, and for the first time in months, I felt like myself again. Then, one night in late September, things shifted. I was cleaning brushes in the kitchen, Juniper draped over the windowsill, when I heard it, a faint clink, clink. Outside, like metal scraping against wood, my heart jumped. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped onto the porch, swinging the beam across the orchard and the long gravel driveway. The trees barely moved. No wind. No one. I muttered to myself, it's probably a loose gate or some branch. I locked the door and tried to return to my peace, though unease crept into my chest. The next night, Juniper hissed, eyes glowing in the dark, staring toward the orchard window. I froze, staring at the shadows until my pulse began to race. A single chain, swinging from an apple branch, caught the moonlight. Nothing else moved. I whispered, "Who's out there?" The wind was still, the night silent, save for the hum of insects. By the 4th night, the noises had grown familiar. Always near midnight, always the same metallic scrape. Then came the knocks. 3 soft, deliberate taps on the back door. My hand shook as I reached for my phone, debating whether to call the sheriff. The sound stopped as abruptly as it began. By morning, Muddy boot prints encircled the porch but didn't lead away. Whoever, or whatever, had been there seemed to vanish. Determined to protect myself, I drove into town and bought 2 security cameras. I set one near the back door and another facing the orchard. When the noises returned that night, the cameras recorded only static, as if someone had jammed the signal. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the footage, seeing nothing but snow-like fuzz. The 5th night arrived with a chill in the air. I was curled on the couch, a mug of tea warming my hands, when I heard it. The 3 knocks. Heart in my throat, I tiptoed to the back door, phone clutched in one hand, flashlight in the other. And then I heard it, a whisper, a voice low and deliberate, coming through the brass mail slot. "Rose, open up." I froze. My stomach twisted. "Who is this?" I whispered, voice barely audible. No response, just shallow breathing. I backed away from the door, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. The dispatcher kept me calm, instructed me to stay away from windows and doors, and promised officers would be on their way. Meanwhile, I kept an eye on the orchard through the kitchen window. Moonlight glinted off something, a chain, swinging gently in the breeze. By dawn, the officers had searched the property, but found nothing. They chalked it up to pranksters, or possibly a trespasser who had fled. I wasn't convinced. My hands shook as I followed the trail of the chain into the orchard. Under a twisted apple tree, partially covered with dew-soaked grass, I found a small gravestone. Pale, fresh, and unsettling. The earth around it looked recently disturbed. I knelt, brushing away dirt with shaking hands. Carved into the surface were the letters RMC, my initials. I staggered back, heart pounding. The officers later told me there was no record of a grave at that location in county files. My sense of safety shattered. I packed my essentials and spent the next day sleeping in the town's inn, leaving the farmhouse for later. Returning to the farmhouse didn't bring relief. I tried to rationalize everything. Maybe it was someone playing a twisted prank. Maybe the house's old pipes caused metal chains in the orchard to sway in the wind. But the pattern persisted. Each night the chains swayed, the knocking came, and the whisper returned. Sometimes it was barely audible, sometimes louder. Always my name, I never saw anyone. The cameras, too, continued to malfunction precisely at the time the disturbances occurred. It was almost as if the property itself refused to reveal the intruder. I stopped eating on the porch, avoided walking through the orchard, and spent most evenings painting indoors with the blinds closed. I noticed Juniper grew tense too, hissing at corners, following the sound of unseen footsteps. I couldn't sleep. When I tried, I'd awaken to the softest creak of the floorboards, or the low rattle of metal brushing against something in the orchard. One night, desperate to regain control, I set up a makeshift observation post with my laptop, monitoring the cameras for hours. The feed cut out repeatedly. Static, glitches, interruptions. Then came the whisper. It was close now, outside the kitchen window, barely a breath. "Rose, we're watching." I collapsed on the floor, laptop abandoned, my chest heaving. I whispered to myself, I have to leave. By mid-October, the fear had become unbearable. Every sound triggered adrenaline. The whispering, the knocking, the chain swinging. It felt deliberate, personalized. Whoever, or whatever, was doing this knew my habits, my schedule, even my name. I began locking every door and window, but even that didn't help. One evening, I swore I saw a shadow slip between the trees at the orchard's edge. I grabbed a flashlight, stormed outside, but the yard was empty. Only the old apple trees swayed gently, silent witnesses to my panic. Then came the gravestone again. By moonlight, I noticed a second one, smaller, half buried, etched with my name. My mind spun. Who is doing this? Why me? I wanted answers, but I didn't want to be outside long enough to find them. I called the local sheriff again, but officers found nothing. The land was too remote for cameras to capture everything, and the intruder left no fingerprints, no evidence. My sense of reality fractured. I questioned my sanity. Yet every time I passed the orchard, the chain swayed as if to remind me that it wasn't imagination. I moved out of the farmhouse the following week, leaving half-finished paintings, canvases, and art supplies behind. The old house had offered me solitude and inspiration, but it had also shown me that some unknowns are better left alone. Neighbors later told me that winter storms felled the apple tree nearest the grave, roots curling around the buried chain. No explanation ever came for who carved my initials, who left the gravestones, or why the chain moved when no wind blew. The cameras remained silent on footage, even as the disturbances continued. Years later, I still dream of that orchard. I sometimes catch myself waking at 3 a.m., imagining footsteps crunching on the gravel, whispers just beyond the blinds. I've never returned, and I don't plan to. But the experience taught me something important. Some things in life defy reason, but they demand respect. Curiosity is human, but intuition is survival. When something feels wrong, trust it. And sometimes, leaving is the only way to protect what's left of yourself. When your intuition signals danger, don't ignore it. Curiosity can be valuable, but personal safety must come first. Some mysteries, no matter how tempting, are not worth solving. Leaving is sometimes the bravest choice. I used to love the quiet of our little semi-detached house on Laurel Row. 34 years old, 6-year-old daughter Emily, and a husband Ryan, who worked the night shift across town. Most evenings, it was just the two of us. I'd tuck Emily into bed, settle in with a cup of tea, and let the hum of the radiator lull us both to sleep. That was normal. That was safe, until it wasn't. Emily had been restless lately. She refused to sleep alone, claiming someone whispered to her through the wall. I smiled, brushing off her imagination. Kids conjure up the oddest fears. "He talks to me again, Mummy," she whispered one evening, clutching Mr. Cuddles, her stuffed bear. "Who, love?" I asked, trying to sound reassuring. "The grandpa next door. He whispers through the vent. He says he can see me." I felt my chest tighten, but forced a laugh. Mr. Henley was old, reclusive, harmless, or so I thought. I'd only met him once. He mumbled about rubbish bins and shuffled away, eyes downcast, a lonely figure behind his frosted window. Still, Emily was my child. If she was scared, I had to listen. That night, long after Emily had dozed off curled under her blanket, I heard it, a soft tap, 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 from the wall beside her bed. My heart jumped. Tap, pause, tap, tap. I froze, every nerve alert. It was too rhythmic to be a settling house, too precise for a loose shutter or the wind. I pressed my ear to the plaster. "Hello?" I whispered. Silence. Sleep eluded me. Every creak in the floor sounded deliberate. Every groan of the house felt like a message. I told myself it was nothing, but I didn't feel safe anymore. The next morning, I couldn't ignore it. I unscrewed the air vent in Emily's room, expecting maybe a mouse or a bird had found its way inside. What I found instead made my stomach lurch. A tiny hole drilled straight through the vent metal, perfectly aligned toward the neighbor's flat. My fingers shook as I traced it. Someone had been looking through here. I called Ryan immediately. "Something's not right," I said. "The vent, someone's been looking in Emily's room." "Clara, love, call the police right now," he replied, his voice sharp. Officers arrived within minutes. They were calm, professional, but I could see the gravity in their eyes. One of them unscrewed a loose outlet cover behind Emily's bed and found another hole, perfectly drilled, pointing in the same direction. They used a fiber camera to peer through it. My chest tightened as I imagined someone watching my daughter sleep, recording, noting, waiting. When they had a warrant, they searched Mr. Henley's flat. Beneath his quiet exterior was a dark, meticulous obsession. Electronics, hidden cameras, a live feed pointed directly into Emily's room. Photos of neighborhood children lined his shelves, equipment for recording and observing, all concealed behind ordinary furniture and bland walls. When they handcuffed him, Mr. Henley glanced at me with a faint smile. "You should have kept the light off. It's easier to see in the dark." That smile will haunt me forever. Even after he was arrested, sleep didn't return easily. I taped vents, covered outlets, and double-checked locks multiple times a night. Emily started sleeping in her bed again, but only with the hall light spilling through the doorway. The house, once comforting, felt like a trap. Every creak, every whisper of the wind through the vents made me jump. I walked the rooms repeatedly at night, checking the walls, tracing the edges of electrical fittings, scanning every corner for another hole. Ryan tried to comfort me. "It's over, Clara. He's gone. You're safe." I nodded, grateful for his calm, but part of me knew the memory would never fully leave. The thought that a stranger could live so close and watch my daughter, our family, made me hyper-aware. We began slowly restoring normalcy. Lights on at night, motion sensors installed, cameras pointed at the entryways. I kept journals of every strange noise, every sensation that seemed out of place. Control became my weapon against fear. Weeks turned into months. The police handled Mr. Henley's case, the evidence piled up, and he was sentenced to years behind bars. But the emotional weight didn't disappear. I still caught myself glancing at the vents, listening for tapping, even in the daylight. Emily sometimes asked, "Mummy, he's not there anymore, right?" I would nod, forcing a smile, but my eyes drifted to that wall, painted over, patched, silent. How many nights had she been watched without our knowledge? How easily someone could hide behind ordinary walls, blending in with the mundane. Every time the wind rattled the house or a shadow fell strangely across the floor, my stomach twisted. I had learned a hard lesson about trust, safety, and vigilance. The world looked the same, but I could no longer treat it as if I were fully safe inside it. Even friends' houses, even familiar places, carried new caution. I realized how fragile our illusions of security can be. It's not that I lived in constant terror, it's that awareness became permanent, a small, necessary price for the safety of my daughter. Life eventually found a rhythm again. Emily's laughter returned, brighter than before, filling the corners of our home. Ryan's shifts continued, our routines became comforting. But I never forgot the feeling of a stranger's eyes through the wall, the invasion of privacy so intimate and invasive it reshaped my perception of home. I began teaching Emily about safety in subtle ways, how to lock doors, recognize signs of danger, trust her instincts, not to scare her, but to empower her. And I taught myself the same lessons, reinforcing boundaries and vigilance without letting fear consume my daily life. The moral became clear. Security is fragile. Danger isn't always obvious, and threats can hide in plain sight. Walls, doors, and locks are only part of the protection. Awareness, preparedness, and respect for potential risk are just as vital. Home is meant to be safe, but safety requires action, observation, and the willingness to recognize that even familiar spaces can harbor danger. Now, when I tuck Emily in, I double-check the vents, glance at the walls, and take a deep breath, knowing the past has left its mark. We live in the same house, under the same roof, yet the lessons remain. Vigilance, awareness, and the courage to protect those we love, even when the world feels deceptively ordinary. Safety is never guaranteed by walls, doors, or locks alone. True protection comes from vigilance, awareness, and the courage to act when danger hides in plain sight. We must respect the fragility of what we consider secure and teach both ourselves and our children to navigate the world with caution and mindfulness. I'd never been alone in our house on Cedar Avenue for this long. My parents, both nurses, had gone downtown for a hospital fundraiser, promising to be home before midnight, and I had the place to myself for the first time in months. 17 years old, alone, and bored stiff. At least that's what I told myself. I made popcorn, curled up on the couch, and cued a romantic comedy, grateful for the rare stillness. The apartment was modest, the kind that smelled faintly of pine cleaner and old carpet, but I loved it because it felt mine, even if just for a few hours. Outside, the street was quiet. The Hanlons lived next door, but for once, they weren't throwing a party. That fact alone made me appreciate the stillness even more. Halfway through my movie, a sharp crash cut through the quiet. My heart skipped a beat. Glass. Somebody broke something. I froze, staring at the wall separating our duplex. There it was again, muffled voices, angry and low, slamming against each other like a storm trapped behind drywall. I muted the TV, straining to hear another crash, and then silence. I tiptoed to the window, parting the blinds just enough to see the narrow driveway. Two hooded figures slipped into the shadows, moving fast. One carried a bag that swung heavily from their shoulders. My fingers tightened around my phone. My pulse was a drumbeat in my ears. Then I smelled it. Smoke. Thin at first, curling under the baseboard, but in seconds it thickened, brushing against my ankles with a suffocating heat. "Oh my God," I whispered. Choking, I grabbed my jacket, keys, and phone and bolted for the front door. Behind me, something popped, a low, heavy sound, and then a flash of orange filled the cracks of the wall. Outside, the cold hit me like a slap. I could hear the sirens before I even saw the fire trucks, red and blue lights painting the street in alarm. A firefighter held me back, asking questions I couldn't answer fast enough. "There's nobody else inside, right?" I cried. They assured me the Hanlon's side was empty. My chest was still hammering, and my stomach felt hollow. Hours later, wrapped in a foil blanket, I overheard an officer speaking to my parents. "Third incident tied to that address this year," he said quietly. My mother's face turned pale. "A message?" she asked. "Not your daughter," he replied. "Wrong wall, wrong family. But it could have been worse." I sat on the curb, shivering, and tried to process what had just happened. The fire trucks had left, but the smell of burnt wood lingered like an oppressive fog. I glanced across the narrow space separating our homes. The Hanlon's side was just charred beams now, blackened and skeletal. Between the driveways, I noticed boot prints in the frost. Only one set. They led up close to my window and then stopped, like whoever had done this had paused to consider their work. That night, my parents refused to let me sleep alone. I lay in bed listening to the faint hum of the city outside, every creak of the house amplified in my mind. I kept imagining those hooded figures, how easily they could have mistaken our side for theirs, and the terrifying truth that danger doesn't always come from the street. It sometimes lives just a few inches away. The next morning, the sun glinted weakly off frost-covered roofs, but the warmth didn't reach me. My parents tried to reassure me, while insurance inspectors poked through the rubble next door, but I couldn't shake the image of the figures slipping through the dark, the way the flames had swallowed the Hanlons' home like it was nothing. "I'm going to check on the place," I told my mother. She shook her head. "You've had enough for one night, Josie. Stay here." But I had to see it for myself. I stepped gingerly along the sidewalk, crunching frozen leaves underfoot. The duplex's other half was unrecognizable, smoke-stained, black beams leaning like broken teeth. I crouched to look closer. Someone had left a door unlocked, probably in the chaos of evacuation. And that was when I noticed it. A pair of black gloves, slightly singed, lying near the doorway. Whoever had been here had taken risks I couldn't imagine. Back inside, I kept glancing at the wall separating our homes. I could almost hear the faint echoes of last night, the crash, the shouting. I wondered if anyone was listening now, if the people responsible had lingered nearby, planning another hit. Fear gnawed at the edges of my mind. Every shadow looked taller, every creak sounded deliberate. By afternoon, the city had sent fire inspectors and police again, asking questions I didn't have answers for. Did you see anyone suspicious? Any cars parked nearby? Anything at all? I described the hooded figures, the bag, the single set of boot prints. They took notes and promised to keep watch, but promises in situations like this felt thin. That night I stayed on the couch, lights on, phone in hand. Every sound, wind rattling against the siding, a distant dog barking, set me on edge. My parents tried to watch TV to distract themselves, but I couldn't focus. I imagined the intruders across the street, walking the line between homes, maybe even watching. I wanted to believe it had been a mistake, a one-off, but deep down, I knew it wasn't random. Someone wanted to scare the Hanlons, and we had been unlucky enough to be in the wrong place, at the wrong time. Days passed, and the fire became a local story. News crews came, interviews were conducted, and neighbors whispered behind curtains. I kept noticing small things, the faint smell of smoke that lingered in the hallway, the subtle dents in the walls where soot had settled. Each time I heard movement in the duplex, my stomach lurched. One afternoon, the police knocked Officer Henderson introduced himself, a young man with tired eyes. "We're stepping up patrols," he said. "I want you to stay alert and call immediately if anything seems off, even small things." I nodded, too anxious to speak. I started keeping a journal of noises, people, and sights. Every time I heard a crash, every sudden movement outside, I recorded it. It helped me feel some control over a situation that had felt so uncontrollable. I even talked to neighbors who weren't involved, sharing information cautiously. Some had seen strange cars idling near the duplex weeks before. Others remembered hearing fights late at night. Slowly, I realized I wasn't alone in my fear. People wanted safety too. In a weird way, that sense of shared concern gave me a small comfort, though it didn't erase the memory of the fire or the image of those hooded figures. Weeks passed, but the tension never fully eased. I noticed things: a scratch on the window frame, the faint smear of something dark on the side porch. Every detail seemed significant. Officer Henderson and his team occasionally checked in, but the trail went cold more often than not. One evening, I was in my room, headphones on, trying to study. Through the thin wall, I heard muffled footsteps, soft but deliberate. My breath hitched. I pressed my ear closer, hearing a whisper that sounded like my name. Heart racing, I grabbed my phone. The hallway was empty. I texted my parents, they were in bed, and waited for the comfort of someone else in the house. Silence. It dawned on me. Danger had been close, always closer than I wanted to admit. I had felt safe, alone in my quiet duplex, but the reality was that threats could live on the other side of a wall, unseen, unheard, but real. That realization reshaped how I moved through my own home, how I locked doors, how I slept. Months later, the duplex was rebuilt. We moved briefly, though my parents made sure the new place felt safer. Better locks, cameras, motion sensors. I tried to let the memory fade, but every sudden crash, every whispered argument in the distance, triggered the old fear. Safety is never guaranteed, even in places we think we know. Danger doesn't always come from outside. It can live just inches away, behind walls, behind doors, hidden in normalcy. Awareness, caution, and respect for our vulnerability became my daily habits. Even now, years later, whenever I hear glass shatter, I think of the night the fire came too close, of the hooded figures on the wrong wall, and the fragility of what we call safety. Life teaches you lessons in subtle ways, sometimes with smoke and fire, sometimes with silence and fear, but always in ways that stick with you. True safety isn't about walls or locks. It's about awareness, preparedness, and respecting the fragility of the world around you. Danger can exist close to home, and vigilance, caution, and presence of mind are essential, even in the most familiar places. Chicago winters always had a way of making me feel smaller. Snow swirled along the streets like it was trying to erase everything beneath it, and the West Loop at night was quieter than I'd ever remembered. I had just returned from my night shift at the printing company, walking past shuttered restaurants and empty sidewalks, clutching a cup of reheated coffee in one hand and a leftover container in the other. My 7th-floor apartment felt like a refuge, small, cramped, familiar. I slid the container into the microwave, the hum filling the kitchen. The radiator rattled softly behind me, and I sank into the couch, letting the warmth seep through my jacket. That's when it happened. The intercom buzzed, sharp, urgent. I froze, letting my hand hover in midair. Nobody ever used it. Not since the building installed the panel 5 years ago. Another buzz, this time a series of short, frantic bursts. My pulse quickened. I pressed the talk button and said cautiously, "Yeah?" Static. Then a soft, shaky voice. "Please, let me in. Someone's following me." I frowned, heart hammering. "Who's this?" The camera feed in the lobby showed only fuzzy static. Broken months ago. "Are you hurt?" A pause. Then in a whisper, "You don't remember me, do you?" My throat tightened. I leaned closer to the intercom. "What? Who are you?" "You used to live in 3B, the voice said, calm now, almost eerily so. 3B, my old apartment. The one I left last spring after the break-in. I remembered coming home to shattered glass, scattered photographs, but nothing stolen. The police had said it wasn't theft. Someone had been watching. I'd moved upstairs to Unit 7B, hoping to forget. "Who is this?" I repeated, louder this time. The intercom clicked. Silence. Then faintly, "You never fixed the window lock?" My eyes shot to the living room window. The curtain swayed gently, though the radiator heat was off. The lock, I had checked it earlier, was unlatched. I swallowed hard. "Whoever you are, I'm calling the police," I whispered. Before I could, the buzzer shrieked again, long, piercing. I yanked the cord from the wall and stumbled back, fumbling for my phone. Then, tap, tap, tap. The glass rattled. A muddy handprint appeared, smeared across the inside of the pane. My heart slammed against my ribs as I realized someone had been there, right inside my apartment, watching, waiting. When the officers arrived, the lobby door was locked from the inside. Nobody outside. On the fire escape, partially buried in snow, were footprints leading from the alley. Inside, near my window, were streaks of grease and fragments of wet hair caught in the latch. The detective asked about anyone who had lived in 3B after me. I didn't know anyone. The unit had been vacant. But checking the records revealed one chilling fact. A missing person report from April. A 22-year-old girl, last seen leaving Unit 3B after the police left. I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the apartment became amplified. The radiator's gentle groan, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant traffic below. Every shadow seemed to hold movement. I kept glancing at the window, imagining someone standing there, staring in. I called my sister, trying to keep my voice steady. "You won't believe what just happened," I began. I told her about the intercom, the voice, the handprint. She gasped and told me to stay somewhere else. But the thought of leaving my apartment, my routines, my life, felt impossible. The next morning, I visited the building office. I asked about the intercom system, any maintenance records, and whether anyone new had access to 3B. The manager shrugged. "No one since you left," she said. "The unit's been empty aside from inspections. Strange stuff happens in old buildings." Strange didn't cut it. I wanted answers. I began retracing my steps, memories of the break-in flooding back, the shattered window, the scattered photographs. Nothing had been stolen, but someone had clearly been inside. Observing, I felt a cold realization settle over me. Whoever had broken in before could still know my habits, my routines, perhaps even my new apartment. Later that day, I returned to 3B. The door was empty, silent, unremarkable. But I noticed scratches on the windowsill, faint enough that I hadn't seen them last spring. I pressed my fingers to the grooves. They were fresh, or at least recent. Someone had been here. The thought twisted my stomach. Detectives returned the next afternoon. "We found her," one said quietly, showing me a photo from the police database. A young woman, scared eyes, hair damp and tangled. I realized with a jolt, this must have been the voice on the intercom. She had been living, trapped somehow, in the shadow of my old apartment. I had nightmares that night. Every intercom buzz, every cough from the radiator felt like her whisper. I imagined the girl crouched behind walls, hiding, reaching out for help. I pictured the person who had trapped her, watching, waiting for the perfect moment to act. I started documenting everything: noises, irregularities, strangers in the lobby, unmarked cars on the street. It became an obsession. My routine, once simple and quiet, turned into surveillance. Every day I wondered what had been happening in 3B, and whether I had unknowingly stepped into danger just by moving back into my old building. Weeks went by. The girl was recovered, but the man responsible remained at large. Police had traced some digital footprints, online forums, Craigslist messages, patterns of vacancy, but he was elusive. I found myself constantly on edge, checking locks, peering down the fire escape, listening to the faint hum of old wiring. I even installed cameras outside my apartment. Each night, I would sit in the dark, watching the monitors, imagining shapes moving through snow, wondering if someone was returning. My friends teased me at first, but they didn't understand the unease that comes from feeling like someone has been inside your life, unnoticed, while you slept, cooked, and lived. I began speaking to the neighbors more, quietly asking questions, looking for patterns, any information that could help police. Some had seen people loitering near the building in the weeks before the girl's disappearance. Others had noticed odd deliveries to empty units. Everyone agreed something was wrong, but no one could pinpoint what. Months passed. The girl recovered physically, though I knew scars lingered in ways we don't always see. The police kept watch, patrolling the building, and my life returned somewhat to normal. But the quiet, that comforting silence of my apartment, never felt the same. I learned to lock every window, check the fire escape nightly, and question even the smallest irregularities. I learned that the world could harbor danger even in familiar places, that safety is never guaranteed by walls or locks alone. Awareness, vigilance, and immediate action were as essential as anything else. Even now, years later, I pause at the intercom, glance at a shadow, and remember the night a voice called out from the past. Life moves forward, but I carry the lesson with me. Safety is fragile, and sometimes the most ordinary spaces can conceal the most extraordinary danger. True safety is not guaranteed by walls, locks, or routines. It requires vigilance, awareness, and the courage to act when danger hides in familiar places. Danger can be closer than we imagine, and preparedness is the only protection we truly control. The rain had been relentless all evening, drumming against the windows of flat 14B like it had a message to deliver. Bristol's autumn chill crept under the door and through the drafty window frames, but I barely noticed I was Elena Ward, 29, a social worker who had spent the last 3 weeks moving between crisis calls, clients, and paperwork. Finally, tonight, I had the apartment to myself. I poured a glass of red wine and sank into the couch, dimming the lights to a soft golden glow. Crime documentaries had become a guilty comfort for me, half for the story, half to remind myself that other people had worse nights than mine. My laptop hummed softly as I replied to a few emails, fingers flying across the keyboard. The building was old. Pipes groaned when someone upstairs ran water, and thin walls made every sound a little too intimate. I could hear my neighbor's television, as if it were in my own room. Normally, it was a comfort, a background murmur. Tonight, it felt like a warning. At 11:42 p.m., the landline rang. My landline. I rarely used it. For a moment, I thought my eyes were playing tricks. I stared at the tiny screen. The number flashing back at me wasn't someone else's. It was my own. I laughed nervously. Maybe fatigue was making me see things, but curiosity won over fear. I picked up. "Hello," a man's voice, polite and toneless, responded. "Good evening, Elena. You left your kitchen light on." My heart stopped. "Sorry, who is this?" There was a soft chuckle. "You should turn it off, before it gets their attention." The line went dead. I froze, staring toward the dark hallway leading to my kitchen. Sure enough, the light was still on. My laughter felt brittle. I told myself it was a prank, a coincidence. Maybe a neighbor who had my number. I turned off the light, locked the door, and tried to relax. Then, the intercom buzzed. My stomach sank. The building's screen flickered to life, showing a distorted black and white image of a man in a raincoat holding a paper bag. He didn't move, didn't look up. I pressed the button. "Who is it?" "Delivery for Elena Ward," the man said, calm, almost low. I didn't order anything," I stammered. After a pause, he said, "You didn't." But he did. Then the screen went black. My pulse raced as I called Liam, my coworker and closest friend. "Lock everything and call the police," he instructed immediately, his voice tense. I obeyed, checking every window, every lock, every chain. And yet, the kitchen light flickered back on. My knees buckled. I crept closer, keeping the chain latched, and noticed faint movement. A shadow pacing, shifting back and forth. My phone buzzed. Liam's message. "Are you okay?" I typed back, trembling. "Someone's in my kitchen." Before I could finish, the power went out. The apartment fell into near total darkness, save for the occasional flash of lightning outside. The landline rang again. I lifted the receiver, hands shaking. "I told you to turn the light off," the voice whispered. This time, almost gentle, as if mocking my fear. I barely remembered breathing as I clutched the phone. The police arrived 15 minutes later, lights cutting across the rain-slicked street. When they entered, everything seemed normal. At first, front door locked from the inside. No signs of struggle, no forced entry. But the kitchen told a different story. The chain was snapped clean through, and on the table sat a still warm teacup and a delivery receipt time-stamped 11:47 p.m. I read the name aloud. "Ward, Elena, apartment 9. The officers exchanged glances. The building had no apartment 9. I sat on my couch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the officers sweep the apartment. They treated me with the calm professionalism I needed, but their faces betrayed confusion. Who could have access to a non-existent apartment? One asked. I didn't know. I tried to reason it out. A prank, a delivery mistake, someone with building plans memorized. None of it explained the voice, the landline call, the kitchen shadow. The detective encouraged me to write down every detail I could remember. I described the distorted man on the intercom, the precise timing, the whispering voice, the paper bag, and the fact that the kitchen light had turned on and off seemingly on its own. I realized then that Apartment 9 wasn't just non-existent on paper. It didn't appear anywhere in the building's blueprints either. And yet, something had been there. That night, I barely slept. Every creak in the building felt amplified, every distant drip of water a warning. I kept checking the hallway, the front door, the kitchen chain, the idea that someone, or something, could exist in a space that didn't exist, haunted me. Over the next week, I became a ghost in my own home. I started documenting everything. Timestamps for noises, shadows, misplaced objects. I began speaking to neighbors quietly, asking if anyone had seen strange deliveries, people in the hall, unusual activity. Most shrugged, distracted by their own lives. A few looked uncomfortable. One elderly woman whispered about the old service corridor that had been sealed years ago, forgotten by management. She said rumors floated that someone occasionally moved there, but no one could confirm. I decided to investigate, cautiously. I discovered a narrow service hallway behind a panel in the basement, barely wide enough for a single person. It had old pipes, electrical conduits, and faded numbers scribbled on the wall, including Apartment 9. The number was scratched and worn, almost deliberately obscured. A chill ran down my spine. Apartment 9 had existed once. Someone, or something, had reclaimed it in ways no one accounted for. Months passed. Management sealed the service corridor permanently, police investigated my report, and no one claimed responsibility for the calls or the delivery. I tried to resume normal life, but my perception of safety had shifted. I became meticulous, checking locks, avoiding leaving lights on unnecessarily, questioning the ordinary. I installed extra security cameras and alerted neighbors to irregularities. The building was the same, yet different. I had seen that a place could exist quietly, hidden from official maps, and someone could use it to unsettle the ordinary. Even today, when I pass my building, my eyes flick toward the basement panels, the doors to the sealed hallways. The apartment that shouldn't exist reminded me that the familiar isn't always safe, that our assumptions about security are fragile. Awareness, vigilance, and courage to act are the tools we actually control. I still enjoy evenings at home, but I leave lights on, doors locked, and occasionally I pause before answering unknown calls. The world is ordinary, but danger can exist in corners we don't think to notice. Safety isn't guaranteed by walls, locks, or routines alone. True protection comes from vigilance, awareness, and the courage to act when the world hides secrets in familiar places. Ordinary spaces can conceal extraordinary danger, and preparedness is the only control we truly hold.